everybody! So, in my previous video we talked about the relationship between Britain and India. We talked about India as a colony of the British Empire during the Victorian age, and we also explained why India was considered the jewel in the crown. We also talked about the development of the relationship between Britain and England, since the very beginning until the independence of England in 1947. Now, it is very important to know all of this because some authors, and today I'm going to talk about one of those authors, especially talked about India and talked about the culture and talked about the relationship between British culture and Indian culture. Today we're going to talk about Edward Morgan Forster. Edward Morgan Forster was born in 1879. And, well, he studied at Cambridge, and there in Cambridge he also met and made friends actually with intellectuals that formed the Bloomsbury Group. He also was one of the leading members of the Bloomsbury Group. And during his studies in Cambridge, he developed this interest for human relationships. And he also developed sort of an agnosticism, skepticism, and a strong criticism also towards his own society. He traveled a lot to Italy, to Greece with his mother. There were a lot of women that influenced his education, because he was basically educated by his mother and his aunts. Okay, so anyway, in his early novels, and I'm talking especially about Howard's and about Where Angels Fear to Tread, he talks especially about the upper middle class, the British upper middle class. He talks about that with irony, with witticism, and with criticism too. Then during the First World War he spends most of his time in Egypt, and in 1921 he travels to India, and after this travel he writes his masterpiece, and this masterpiece is A Passage to India. He wrote it in 1924. In his work he basically develops two focus points. The first one is new for him. In fact, he talks about the misunderstandings among the different sections of the British middle class, basically. The second focus point is something completely new and very, very interesting. In fact, he talks about the religious, the cultural, the racial contrasts, okay, between obviously the British society, British people, and Indian people. So we can say that basically he talks about the clash between Western and Eastern cultures. We said before that he was very interested in human relationships, but his conclusion, actually, the conclusion of the novel is quite pessimistic. Okay, the outcome is quite negative. In fact, the friendship basically between the two parts, and I'm talking especially about the open-minded protagonists of the work, Sara Albanese, who was the Muslim doctor, and Mrs. Moore, who was an elderly British woman, British lady. Okay, this friendship fails basically at the end to overcome this cultural and social barriers. So this is quite pessimistic, even if some critics interpret that in a different way, more optimistically, you can say so. There are many interpretations of the work actually. Someone say this is a social comedy. Some others say that it is a religious novel, the religious work. it is some consider that quite realistic, and some others consider that just symbolic. It is considered traditional on one side and modernist on the other side. Basically, we can say that Forster was an intellectual writer belonging to modernism, but it is also true that this work has a very traditional plot and uses quite a traditional technique, narrative technique actually. In fact, we have an omniscient narrator, while during modernism we normally have first-person narrator, interior monologue, and a free association, stream of consciousness. We have nothing about that in a passage to India. But on the other side, it is also an avant-garde work because of the topics. The topics it develops, the themes are extremely new, anti-imperialistic themes basically, and the problem of a human contrast, conflict between the feelings and you can say conventions or manners. So these are quite new topics. He was quite used to talking about also controversial and quite modern avant-garde topics. In fact, in his work Morris, he even talked about homosexuality, which was quite nice at the time. Anyway, back to Passage to India. As I said before, it was written in 1924, and it is divided into three sections, into three parts, according to the author himself. And each part is connected to a special place, special setting, and to a specific season. The first one is in the mosque, and the season is the season of cool weather. Okay, it's a cool weather, cool season. Then the second section is in the caves, and it is connected to hot weather. And the final one, the third one, is in the temples, and it is connected to rain. This is also quite symbolic, actually. It is set in India in the 20s, okay, and the protagonists, especially Aziz and Mrs. Moore, they meet in the mosque for the first time. And Aziz at first is quite annoyed when he sees this elderly British lady entering the mosque, because he is expecting a lack of respect from her. On the contrary, he notices that she is very, very, very respectful, and she is very sensitive. She has an absolute respect for the spirituality of the place, and that is quite amazing for Aziz, and so the two basically become friends. As I said before, Mrs. Moore is in India because she is visiting basically her son, who is the city magistrate, and she's visiting India with her basically future daughter-in-law, Adela. Now, they become friends, they made friends with Aziz, and so he decides to organize an expedition to the Marlborough Caves for them, basically. And during the expedition, basically Adela accuses Aziz of attempting to rape her. Now, this is the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of the we can say the final, the negative outcome of the novel. So the destruction of friendship and of human relationships. Adela finally withdraws her accusations, but it's too late. Aziz is wounded, and he decides to got his relationships with British people, not just Mrs. Moore, but also friends or open-minded British people. He is disappointed, he's wounded, he is offended, and so there is no way to come back, there is no way to go back. And as far as Mrs. Moore is concerned, she never believes Adele's accusations, but nevertheless she becomes hard, and she decides anyway to leave and to go back to Britain. And so she also becomes detached and closed now. So the final result is actually quite pessimistic. As I said before, there are anyway many interpretations. What is interesting is to analyze, okay, the relationship between these two worlds, and it is also very beautiful to read the descriptions of the places in India, okay, written by Forster. This is something that also Kipling does in a very different way, because he talks about, especially about the natural side of the country, and so less civilized part of the country. And this is also quite interesting. In fact, in my next video, I'm going to talk about Kipling and his own interpretation of India. Sorry. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been interesting for you. If you have any comments or any questions, just please leave me a comment below. And if you're interested in my channel, just subscribe. Thank you very much again, and see you very, very soon with English literature. Bye!